My true story from Missouri. I paid for everything. Then they blocked me. Before we dive into this heartbreaking true story, hit that subscribe button, because here every story reminds you, you're not alone. Dear friends, my name is Estelle Merrick, and I'm 74 years old. I live in a quiet neighborhood in Springfield, Missouri, where the maple trees turn gold every October and the neighbors still wave from their porches. My house sits on Dogwood Street, a small 2-bedroom home I bought 30 years ago with money I saved from my teaching salary. It has a front porch with hanging baskets of petunias, a kitchen window that overlooks the bird feeder, and a spare bedroom that used to be filled with toys and children's laughter. For most of my life, I thought family meant everything. I thought love was measured in what you could give, not what you received back. I believed that being needed was the same as being loved, that generosity would guarantee gratitude, that if I just gave enough, money, time, energy, pieces of my own soul, I would earn a permanent place in the hearts of those I cherished most. I was wrong about so many things. Let me tell you my story, not for pity, but because somewhere out there, another grandmother might be sitting in her kitchen at this very moment, staring at a silent phone, wondering what she did wrong. Maybe my words will reach her heart and remind her that she did nothing wrong at all. Maybe she'll recognize herself in these pages and understand that her worth was never determined by her willingness to sacrifice everything for people who learned to take her love for granted. It started small, the way these things always do. When my daughter Sarah married David 12 years ago, I wanted to help them build their life together. They met at a community college barbecue, Sarah studying to be a pharmacy technician, David learning construction management. I remember their wedding, small, held in the fellowship hall of our church, with folding chairs and grocery store flowers arranged in mason jars. I paid for the reception, the cake, Sarah's dress from the outlet mall. They couldn't afford a honeymoon, so I slipped them $500 for emergencies that we all knew would fund a weekend at Lake of the Ozarks. They were young, barely scraping by on David's construction wages and Sarah's part-time work at the pharmacy. Their tiny apartment on Elm Street had peeling wallpaper and a furnace that wheezed through winter nights like an old man with bronchitis. The carpet was stained from previous tenants, and the kitchen faucet dripped constantly, leaving rust stains in the porcelain sink. I remember visiting them that first winter, my breath visible in their living room despite the space heater running constantly in the corner. Sarah served instant coffee in chipped mugs, apologizing for not having cream, for not having sugar, for the cold that seemed to seep through the thin walls. David wore 2 sweaters layered over a flannel shirt, his hands red and cracked from outdoor work, his fingernails permanently stained with construction dirt. "Mom, we're fine," Sarah would say when I offered to help with groceries or utilities, but her voice carried a tremor of uncertainty. I could see the worry lines forming around her eyes, deeper each week, the way she counted change at the checkout counter with the precision of someone for whom every penny mattered. She'd quietly put back items when the total climbed too high, the name-brand cereal, the fresh fruit, sometimes even necessities like laundry detergent. So I helped quietly, telling small lies that felt like acts of love. I'd pay their electric bill directly to the company, claiming there'd been a billing error that credited their account. I'd slip $20 bills into Sarah's purse when she wasn't looking, folded small and tucked behind her driver's license where she'd find them later and assume she'd forgotten about the money. I'd buy extra groceries and pretend I'd gotten carried away at the farmer's market. "I can't possibly eat all these vegetables before they spoil," I'd say, watching relief flood Sarah's face as she accepted the bags of fresh produce, the packages of meat, the household supplies that would stretch their budget for another week. Those small deceptions felt necessary then, ways to preserve their dignity while ensuring their survival, ways to love without making them feel diminished by their need. When little Emma was born 3 years later, followed by baby Michael 2 years after that, my world expanded in ways I never imagined. Those tiny fingers wrapping around mine, those sleepy smiles during midnight bottles, the way they'd calm when I sang old lullabies my own mother had sung to me. I would have given anything to make their world perfect. Emma arrived on a snowy February morning after 18 hours of labor. I spent the night in the hospital waiting room, drinking terrible coffee from vending machines and pacing worn linoleum floors until the nurse called my name. When I held her for the first time, she was impossibly small, her face red and wrinkled, her dark hair damp against her skull. She opened her eyes and seemed to look directly at me, and I felt something shift permanently in my chest. Michael's birth was easier, but no less miraculous. He came quickly, decisively, as if eager to join the world. Where Emma had been delicate and cautious, Michael was robust and bold, even as a newborn. He had David's square chin and Sarah's expressive eyes, and from the beginning, he seemed to know exactly what he wanted. I spent hours at their apartment during those early weeks, rocking babies while Sarah napped, doing laundry while she recovered, cooking meals that would last for days. When Emma got her first cold at 6 months old, I stayed up all night with a humidifier and gentle songs, watching her tiny chest rise and fall while Sarah and David slept in exhausted shifts. The pediatrician bills came, and I quietly paid them. The daycare costs mounted, and I covered those too. When Michael needed formula because Sarah couldn't produce enough milk despite her best efforts, I made sure the pantry stayed stocked with cans. It felt natural then, this giving. It felt like love made tangible, like purpose given form. I had spent my career teaching other people's children, and now I had grandchildren of my own to nurture and protect. Every dollar spent felt like an investment in their future, every sacrifice a small price for their security and happiness. And I tried to. Lord knows, I tried to make everything perfect for them. I paid for Emma's daycare when Sarah went back to work, $300 a week that I transferred directly to Little Sprouts Learning Center. The director, Mrs. Patterson, knew me by name because I was the one who came to enrollment meetings, who signed emergency contact forms, who attended the little holiday programs where 3-year-olds sang off-key songs about autumn leaves and Easter bunnies. When David's truck broke down on a particularly brutal January morning, leaving him stranded on Highway 65 in sub-zero temperatures, I quietly arranged for the repairs at Morrison's auto shop and told them an anonymous Good Samaritan had paid the $600 bill. David never questioned this small miracle, though I saw him looking puzzled when the mechanic handed him the keys with a knowing smile. Christmas mornings became my masterpiece, piles of gifts under their tree, new clothes for the children, toys they'd dreamed about for months. I'd arrive at 6 in the morning to arrange everything perfectly, making sure each child had equal piles, that nothing looked too expensive or obvious. I'd learned to remove price tags carefully, to wrap gifts in generic paper so their origin couldn't be traced back to my credit card statements. The joy on their faces made every sacrifice worthwhile. Emma would tear through wrapping paper with delighted squeals, holding up each toy like a treasure. Michael would clap his pudgy hands at the bright colors, more interested in the ribbons and bows than the actual gifts. I never wanted them to know the source of their abundance. I just wanted to see those bright smiles, to feel useful, to matter in their expanding world, to be the grandmother who made magic happen on special mornings. "Grandma Estelle brings the best presents," Emma would whisper, and my heart would swell until it felt ready to burst. The years blurred together in a haze of giving. Dance lessons for Emma at Miss Janet's Academy, $40 a week for tiny pink leotards and dreams of pirouettes. I'd sit in the parent viewing area, watching through floor-to-ceiling mirrors as she attempted pliés and relevés, her face serious with concentration, her tongue poking out slightly when she focused on difficult steps. Baseball equipment for Michael when he joined T-ball. The glove, the cleats, the regulation helmet, the registration fees, the team photos. I bought snacks for the whole team when it was their turn, arriving at the field with coolers full of juice boxes and granola bars, watching from the bleachers as Michael swung wildly at pitches, his face bright with determination even when he missed. A new washing machine when theirs flooded their basement, ruining photo albums and childhood mementos that couldn't be replaced. Vacation trips to Silver Dollar City and Branson, where I'd pay for tickets, meals, and souvenirs while watching from park benches as they rode roller coasters, my purse lighter, but my heart full. I'd capture everything on my camera: Emma's face on the Ferris wheel, Michael's wonder at the magic shows, Sarah and David looking younger and happier than they had in months. I documented everything in those days. Photos of Emma's first dance recital, where she forgot her routine halfway through but kept smiling. Videos of Michael hitting his first home run, a lucky swing that sent the T-ball bouncing into the outfield. candid shots of family dinners where everyone looked happy and fed and secure. I thought I was preserving memories for all of us. I didn't realize I was creating evidence of my own gradual disappearance from the center of the frame, documentation of how I was slowly being repositioned from participant to observer, from family member to family photographer. The house came up for sale on Elm Street, a beautiful 2-story colonial with a wraparound porch and enough yard for the children to play. It had been owned by the Hendersons for 30 years, meticulously maintained with fresh paint and updated appliances. The realtor's sign had barely been planted when Sarah mentioned it during Sunday dinner at my place. "It's perfect," she said, stirring her coffee absently, her eyes distant with longing. 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, and that kitchen with the big island where the kids could do homework while I cook. There's even a reading nook by the front window. She paused, watching Emma color at the dining table while Michael played with his blocks on the floor. But the down payment. She shrugged, the dream already fading from her voice like steam from her coffee cup. I wrote the check that Tuesday, sitting at my kitchen table with the morning light streaming through lace curtains my mother had made decades ago. $25,000. Most of my savings from 40 years of teaching elementary school, money I'd planned to use for my own retirement, maybe a small trip to see the ocean I'd always dreamed about. But dreams seemed less important than my daughter's happiness, less urgent than my grandchildren's stability. I told them it was an early inheritance, something I wanted to see them enjoy while I was still alive, to witness their happiness, to watch their faces light up with the possibility of a real home. The lie came easily because it felt like a kindness, a way to let them accept the gift without the burden of overwhelming gratitude. David shook my hand awkwardly that afternoon, his calloused palm rough against mine, his eyes avoiding direct contact as if he couldn't quite believe what was happening. "I don't know how to thank you, Mrs. Merrick," he mumbled, and I could see he was genuinely moved, genuinely grateful in a way that made my chest tight with emotion. Sarah cried and hugged me tight, her body shaking with relief and disbelief. "Mom, this is too much. How can we ever repay you? This changes everything for us, everything for the kids. They'll have their own rooms, their own yard to play in. Oh God, Mom, thank you." "Just be happy," I whispered into her hair, breathing in the familiar scent of her shampoo, the perfume she'd worn since college. "That's all I need. Just be happy and let me be part of your happiness." I meant those words completely. I wanted nothing more than to see them flourish, to watch my grandchildren grow up in a house with enough space for their dreams, enough stability for their futures. I wanted to be the grandmother who made impossible things possible, who turned wishes into reality through love and sacrifice. They moved in on a crisp October Saturday. I helped pack boxes, scrub floors, and arrange furniture. When evening came, we sat on their new porch, watching Emma chase fireflies in the yard while Michael toddled after her on unsteady legs. "This is perfect," Sarah murmured, and I believed we had everything we needed. But somewhere in those months that followed, something changed. The phone calls became shorter, more hurried. Sarah would answer with a distracted, "Hi, Mom," while I could hear the television or the children arguing in the background. Sunday dinners at my house turned into rushed visits, where they seemed to check their phones constantly, where David would glance at his watch and mention early morning commitments. When I'd offered to babysit, something I'd done regularly for years, Sarah would find reasons why it wasn't necessary. The children had play dates, or they were tired, or they needed to maintain their routine. "The kids are fine with the sitter," she'd say, referring to the teenager down the street I'd never met. "You don't need to worry about it." But worrying was what I did. It's what grandmothers do. We worry about scraped knees and hurt feelings and whether our grandchildren know they're loved unconditionally. I tried not to read too much into these small shifts, these subtle closings of doors that had once been wide open. I tried not to read too much into these small shifts. Families grow busy. Children need structure. Young parents need independence. I told myself these things while I sat in my empty living room, where Emma's drawings still covered my refrigerator and Michael's toy trucks lined the windowsill. Christmas that year felt different from the moment I walked through their front door. I arrived with my usual armload of gifts, carefully chosen, beautifully wrapped, each one selected with specific memories of the children's interests and needs. But the warmth seemed forced, performance-like. The children still hugged me, still tore into their presents with squeals of delight, but there was something rehearsed about their gratitude, something that made me feel like an audience member rather than a participant. I sat in the corner chair, the one that had somehow become Grandma's chair over the years, positioned slightly apart from the main seating area. From there, I watched as David's parents arrived with their own modest gifts, immediately folded into conversations about vacation plans and weekend activities I hadn't heard about. They were seated at the dining table for dinner, asked their opinions about everything from the children's school choices to plans for summer camps. They posed naturally for pictures with the grandchildren, their arms draped casually around small shoulders, their smiles genuine and relaxed. "Estelle, could you move a bit?" Sarah asked when they gathered for the family photo. "We need you out of the frame for this one." I moved to the kitchen, where I spent the rest of the afternoon washing dishes and listening to laughter from the next room. When I finally left that evening, my arms empty of gifts, but somehow heavy with something I couldn't name, Emma ran after me. "Grandma, you forgot this." She pressed a crayon drawing into my hands, a stick figure family with a house and a son. "Where am I, sweetheart?" I asked, studying the paper. Emma's face scrunched in concentration. "Oh, I forgot to draw you. Sorry, Grandma." I kept that drawing on my kitchen table for weeks, staring at that missing figure while I ate my solitary dinners. Spring brought new requests, each one presented with the same combination of desperation and assumption that I'd already noticed but hadn't named. Emma needed money for a school trip to the Science Museum, $35 for the bus, lunch, and admission. Michael needed special orthopedic shoes for his flat feet, $120 at the pediatric specialty store. The house needed a new roof after a particularly vicious hailstorm in April left shingles scattered across their yard like broken promises. Each time, I said yes without hesitation. Each time, I watched my bank account shrink while my family's comfort grew. The roof cost $4,000. The shoes were replaced twice as Michael's feet grew. Emma's school trips multiplied. The zoo, the art museum, an overnight camping experience that required special equipment and permission forms I helped fill out. But I wasn't growing with them. I was becoming smaller somehow, less visible, more expendable, like a bank account that existed solely for withdrawals, never expecting deposits of attention or appreciation. The invitations stopped coming gradually, so subtly that I almost convinced myself I was imagining the exclusion. Birthday parties happened without me. First Emma's 7th birthday, then Michael's 5th. I'd see the photos later on Facebook, colorful snapshots of cake-covered faces and party hats, the children blowing out candles while surrounded by friends and other family members. The parties looked elaborate and expensive. There were hired entertainers, themed decorations, gift bags for all the attending children. I wondered who had paid for these celebrations, these moments I was somehow deemed unworthy of sharing. When I asked Sarah about Emma's party, she'd looked genuinely surprised, as if the thought of inviting me had never crossed her mind. "Oh, we didn't think you'd want to come. It was mostly kids anyway, very loud and chaotic. You know how those parties are." But I saw the other grandparents in those photos. I saw David's parents laughing and helping serve cake. I saw aunts and uncles, family friends who'd been included in moments that should have been mine too. The breaking point came on a humid Tuesday in July, one of those oppressive Missouri summer days when the air feels thick enough to swim through. I was driving back from the grocery store, my trunk full of ingredients for the sugar cookies Emma loved, when I passed the community pool. The parking lot was crowded with families seeking relief from the heat. That's when I saw them, Sarah, David, and the children, along with David's parents and his sister's family. They were having a family barbecue at one of the covered pavilions, the kind of casual gathering I used to organize and pay for. David was manning a grill while the adults sat around picnic tables laden with food. The children were taking turns jumping off the diving board, their joyful shrieks echoing across the water. I parked across the street and watched for several minutes, my hands gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. Emma had grown taller since I'd seen her last, her hair longer and braided in a style I didn't recognize. Michael was confidently swimming in the shallow end, no longer the toddler who needed water wings and constant supervision. Sarah was laughing at something David's mother had said, her head thrown back in genuine delight. It looked perfect, complete, like a Norman Rockwell painting of the ideal American family, and I wasn't part of it. I was a stranger watching through car windows, separated by asphalt and years of accumulated distance I'd never intended to create. I drove home and called Sarah that evening. "I saw you at the pool today," I said, trying to keep my voice light. "It looked like fun." There was a pause. "Oh, yeah, it was just a last-minute thing. David's mom suggested it." "I could have brought potato salad," I offered. "You know how Emma loves my recipe." Another pause, longer this time. "Mom, we didn't want to bother you. You're always so busy." "Busy?" I almost laughed. Busy with what? My empty house? My silent phone? My evenings spent watching game shows and wondering when I'd become a bother instead of a blessing? "I'm never too busy for family," I said quietly. "I know, Mom. We need our space sometimes. You understand, right?" I said I understood, but I didn't. I understood that I'd become something to be managed rather than embraced. I understood that my love had been accepted, but not reciprocated. I understood that I'd been paying for a place in their lives that was never really mine to begin with. The final blow came in September, just as the leaves were beginning to turn the brilliant reds and golds that had always reminded me why I loved Missouri autumns. Sarah called me on a Thursday afternoon, her voice tight with the kind of stress I'd learned to recognize over the years, the tone that preceded requests for money. "Mom, I need to ask you something, and I hope you'll understand." My heart began to race, though I couldn't have said whether from anticipation or dread. "What is it, honey?" David got passed over for that promotion he'd been counting on, and money's really tight right now, tighter than it's been in years. Her voice cracked slightly. "The mortgage payment is due next week, and we're short about $800. I know you've already done so much for us, but I didn't know who else to call." The number hit me like a physical blow. $800 was most of my monthly Social Security check, money I needed for my own utilities, my own groceries, my own survival. But hearing the desperation in my daughter's voice, I felt the familiar pull of maternal instinct overriding practical considerations. "Of course," I said before she could finish, the words automatic after years of saying yes. "I'll transfer it today." The relief in her voice was immediate and palpable. "Thank you, Mom. God, thank you so much. I don't know what we'd do without you. You're literally saving us." But even as I logged into my online banking that afternoon, even as I initiated the transfer that would leave my own account dangerously low, something felt different. Final. Like I was paying for something more than just a mortgage payment. Like I was purchasing my own dismissal. 3 days later, I tried to call to check on them, to see if the mortgage crisis had been resolved, to hear Emma's voice asking about the cookies I'd planned to bake. The phone rang once before going straight to voicemail. Sarah's recorded message, cheerful and familiar, asking callers to leave a message. I tried again the next day, then the next. Each time, the same pattern. One ring, then voicemail. By the weekend, I was beginning to worry. Had something happened to them? Was someone hurt? Were they dealing with some crisis I didn't know about? I drove to their house on Sunday morning, my hands shaking slightly as I gripped the steering wheel. I'd planned to surprise them with fresh cinnamon rolls from Muller's Bakery downtown, the ones with the thick cream cheese frosting that made Emma dance with delight. But when I knocked on the front door, the door of the house I'd helped them buy, the door I'd walked through hundreds of times, no one answered. I could see David's truck in the driveway, unwashed and familiar. I could hear the television through the windows, the sounds of a family at home. But no one came to the door, despite my repeated knocking, despite my calling their names through the wood. I left the cinnamon rolls on the porch, along with a note asking them to call me, and drove home with my heart pounding and my mind racing through possibilities I didn't want to consider. That evening, I tried calling again. This time, the phone didn't even ring. It went straight to a message. "The number you have dialed is not in service." But I knew it was in service. I'd called it a week ago. I tried texting Sarah. The messages showed as delivered but never read. I tried calling David's phone. Same result. Slowly, terribly, the truth began to sink in. I'd been blocked, cut off, erased from their lives as cleanly as deleting a contact from a phone. I sat in my kitchen that night, staring at Emma's drawing still taped to my refrigerator, and tried to understand what I'd done wrong. Had I been too pushy? Too generous? Had my love become suffocating rather than supportive? Or had I simply served my purpose? Had they taken what they needed and decided they no longer needed me? The questions tormented me for weeks. I drove past their house sometimes, hoping to catch a glimpse of the grandchildren I missed so desperately. Once, I saw Emma getting on the school bus. She looked taller, older. I wondered if she missed me at all, or if my absence had been explained away as easily as my presence had been dismissed. I tried reaching out through mutual friends, through other family members, but the message was always the same. Sarah and David needed space. They were going through a difficult time. They'd reach out when they were ready. But I knew better. I knew that when someone blocks your number, when they refuse to answer your letters, when they cut you out of their lives so completely that you might as well not exist, they're not planning to reach out. They're planning to move on, without you. The holidays came and went. I spent Christmas alone for the first time in 12 years, surrounded by gifts I'd bought for grandchildren I couldn't see. I donated them to charity on New Year's Day, along with most of the toys and clothes that had accumulated in my guest room, the room I'd always kept ready for sleepovers that would never happen again. Winter melted into spring, and with it came a slow, painful acceptance. I couldn't force my way back into their lives. I couldn't buy my way back into their love. All I could do was figure out how to live with the pieces of my heart they'd taken with them. I started small with my reconstruction. I joined a watercolor class at the community center, something I'd always wanted to try but never had time for when I was busy being everyone's solution to everything. The instructor, a patient woman named Patricia, who wore paint-stained aprons and smiled with genuine encouragement, taught us to see light differently. "Don't paint what you think you see," she'd say, walking between our easels. "Paint what's actually there. Sometimes reality is more beautiful than our assumptions." My first painting was terrible, a lopsided vase of flowers that looked more like a child's crayon drawing than art. The proportions were wrong, the colors muddy, the perspective completely skewed. But it was mine, created by my hands, born from my choices, existing without anyone's approval or gratitude. I painted 3 more that week, each one slightly better than the last. By the end of the month, I'd filled a small sketch pad with watercolor experiments, landscapes from memory, still lifes of objects around my house, abstract color studies that had no purpose except beauty. The art class led to other discoveries, connections I'd never expected. There was Margaret, a retired nurse whose husband had passed 2 years earlier, leaving her to navigate widowhood with grace and determination. There was Robert, a former mechanic whose arthritis had ended his career but not his desire to create beautiful things. There was Linda, whose grown children lived in different states and rarely called, but who found family in our Tuesday morning sessions. We became friends gradually, naturally, bonding over shared struggles with perspective and shading, celebrating small victories like a successful sky or a flower that actually looked like a flower. These people valued me for my presence, not my bank account. They appreciated my attempts at creativity, not my ability to solve their problems. From the art class, I discovered other opportunities I'd never considered. There was a book club that met monthly at the library, where passionate readers discussed everything from contemporary fiction to historical biographies. A walking group that explored local nature trails every Saturday, regardless of weather. A community garden where I could grow tomatoes and zucchini while sharing stories with people who had no agenda beyond friendship. For the first time in years, I was valued for who I was rather than what I could provide. I thought about writing to Sarah multiple times during those dark months, composing long letters in my head that I never put to paper. I wanted to explain how much she'd hurt me, to demand answers or apologies, to make her understand the depth of my pain and confusion. But what would be the point? She'd made her choice. She'd weighed my love against my usefulness and found me wanting when the balance shifted. Instead, I wrote to my lawyer, Harold Brennan, a kind man who'd handled my affairs since my husband died 15 years ago. I changed my will on a gray Tuesday in March, sitting in his oak-paneled office while rain streaked the windows and drummed against the glass like impatient fingers. The house, the savings, the life insurance, the small investment account I'd built over decades of careful living, None of it would go to Sarah and David now. Instead, it would fund scholarships for underprivileged children at the local elementary schools, support the animal shelter where I'd started volunteering, and help maintain the community garden where I'd found unexpected friendship among the tomato plants and bean rows. "Are you sure about this, Estelle?" Harold asked gently, his reading glasses perched on the end of his nose as he reviewed the documents. "Families sometimes reconcile. People change. Circumstances change." I thought about Emma's drawing, still tucked in my jewelry box at home next to my wedding ring and my mother's pearls. I thought about Michael's laugh, the way he used to clap his hands when I sang silly songs about itsy-bitsy spiders and wheels on buses. I thought about all the love I'd poured into their lives like water into a broken vessel, love that had been accepted and discarded like an empty container once its contents had been consumed. "I'm sure," I said, signing my name with a steady hand. "They've already taken everything they wanted from me. This way, my money will go to people who might actually appreciate it." Harold nodded sadly. He'd seen families torn apart by money before, had watched love turn transactional and gratitude become extinct. "I'll file these papers today," he promised. "And Estelle, for what it's worth, I think you're doing the right thing." That summer, I took my first solo vacation in 40 years. I'd always wanted to see the Pacific Ocean, but there had never been time or money. I'd spent both on other people's dreams, other people's needs, other people's emergencies that somehow always took precedence over my own quiet longings. Now I booked a flight to Portland, Oregon, reserved a small room at a bed and breakfast overlooking the coast, and packed a single suitcase with clothes chosen for my own comfort rather than anyone else's approval. I'll never forget my first glimpse of the Pacific. I'd driven the winding coastal highway from Portland, stopping frequently to take pictures of lighthouses and tide pools, of rock formations that had stood sentinel against the waves for thousands of years. When I finally parked at Cannon Beach and walked across the sand, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: complete solitude without loneliness. The ocean stretched endlessly toward the horizon, gray-green and powerful, indifferent to human concerns. I stood on a weathered piece of driftwood, watching waves crash against Haystack Rock while seagulls wheeled overhead, and felt something shift inside my chest. Not healing exactly, but the beginning of something new. Freedom, maybe. Or perhaps just the quiet satisfaction of a choice made for myself alone. I stayed for 2 weeks, painting watercolor sunsets from my room's small balcony and eating fresh crab at tiny restaurants where nobody knew my story. Nobody expected anything from me beyond payment for my meal. I bought postcards, but didn't send them. I took photos, but didn't share them on social media. These moments belonged to me entirely, free from the obligation to document them for others or justify my enjoyment to anyone. The bed and breakfast owners, Tom and Linda, treated me with the kind of warm hospitality I'd forgotten existed. They asked about my day, not because they wanted something, but because they genuinely cared about their guests' experiences. Linda recommended hiking trails and art galleries. Tom shared stories about local history and the best times to see whales from the shore. They invited me to join other guests for evening wine tastings on the deck, where I found myself laughing at strangers' jokes and sharing stories about my teaching career. For the first time in years, I was valued for who I was rather than what I could provide. When I returned home, my neighbor Mrs. Chen was working in her garden, tending to the roses that climbed her front fence. She looked up and waved when she saw me pulling my suitcase from the car. "How was your trip, Estelle?" she called, wiping soil from her hands with a gardening towel. "Beautiful," I said, and meant it. The word carried more weight than she could have known. Beautiful not just in the scenic sense, but in the deeper way of something being right and good and exactly what it needed to be. She smiled, studying my face with the perceptiveness of someone who'd lived long enough to read between the lines. "You look different, happier, more yourself somehow." I was different. The realization hit me as I unpacked my suitcase, hanging up clothes that still smelled faintly of salt air and possibility. I was learning to be enough for myself. I was discovering that my worth wasn't measured in dollars spent or problems solved, that I didn't need to earn love through sacrifice or purchase a place in someone's life through endless giving. I was valuable simply because I existed, because I had stories to tell and paintings to create and flowers to grow, and wisdom to share with people who actually wanted to receive it. The phone still sits silent most evenings, its black screen reflecting the kitchen light like a dark mirror. Sometimes I wonder if Emma remembers my cinnamon rolls, or if Michael still likes to build block towers that touch the ceiling. Sometimes I imagine Sarah driving past my house on her way to somewhere else, maybe feeling a pang of regret or loss, maybe wondering if she should call, but convincing herself that too much time has passed, that the silence has become too heavy to break. But I don't wait for those calls anymore. I don't measure my days by their silence or my worth by their absence. I don't sit by the phone hoping for invitations that won't come or explanations that would never satisfy anyway. Instead, I measure them by the colors I've mixed on my palette, the subtle gradations of blue I've learned to create for skies that change from dawn to dusk. I measure them by the books I've discussed with new friends at our monthly meetings, by the passionate debates we've had about characters' motivations and authors' intentions. I measure them by the vegetables I've shared from my garden plot, tomatoes so ripe they burst with flavor, zucchini that I've learned to transform into bread and soup, and gratins that disappear at community potluck dinners. I measure them by the letters I write to other grandmothers who find themselves suddenly invisible, women who reach out through support groups and community bulletin boards, desperate to understand what they did wrong. I remind them that love isn't a transaction, and worth isn't determined by what others take from you, that their value exists independent of their ability to solve problems or fund dreams, or smooth over difficulties that aren't theirs to fix. Yesterday, I received a call from a woman named Margaret. She'd found my number through the community center, where I'd started a support group for grandparents navigating difficult family relationships. The group meets every Thursday evening in the basement classroom, a circle of folding chairs where we share stories and strategies, tears and occasional laughter. "My daughter blocked me too," Margaret whispered into the phone, her voice breaking on the words. "After I helped her buy a car, after I babysat her kids for 3 years, after I paid for her wedding. I don't know what I did wrong. I keep calling, but she won't answer. I drive by her house and see the lights on, but she won't come to the door." I recognized every word of her story because it was my story too, the story of women who loved too much and gave too freely, who confused being needed with being loved and discovered too late that gratitude has an expiration date. "You didn't do anything wrong," I told her, speaking the words I'd needed to hear for so long. Sometimes people take what they need and convince themselves they never needed you at all. But that says nothing about your worth. That says everything about their character. We talked for an hour, her tears eventually giving way to something that sounded like relief, the relief of being understood, of being seen, of discovering she wasn't alone in her pain, that other women had walked this path and survived, had found ways to rebuild their lives from the pieces others had left behind. "Will you come to our meeting on Thursday?" I asked. "We're just a group of grandmothers figuring out how to love ourselves as much as we loved our families. It helps to know you're not the only one." She promised she would, and I knew she'd find what I'd found in that basement classroom. Not answers exactly, but community. Not solutions, but solidarity. Not the families who'd rejected us, but new connections built on mutual respect rather than mutual need. I'm planning another trip this fall, maybe to New England to see the autumn leaves paint the mountains in shades of fire and gold. Or perhaps to Arizona, where the desert blooms with unexpected beauty after rain, where cacti flowers emerge like miracles from thorns. I haven't decided yet, and that indecision feels like luxury. The freedom to choose based on whim rather than obligation, on desire rather than duty. For too many years, my decisions were shaped by other people's needs, other people's crises, other people's dreams, that somehow always took precedence over my own. Now they're shaped by my own curiosity, my own desires, my own dreams that I'm finally brave enough to pursue. I'm thinking about taking a pottery class, about learning to shape clay with these hands that spent so many years writing checks and folding laundry and preparing meals for people who learned to take my care for granted. I want to create something beautiful that serves no purpose beyond its own existence. I still love Emma and Michael with a grandmother's fierce, protective love. I still love Sarah, despite everything. Despite the silence and the rejection and the way she made me disappear from her life as easily as deleting a contact from a phone. But I love myself too now. I love the woman who's learning to paint at 74, who's discovered that friendship can bloom in community gardens and book clubs and walking trails. I love the woman who's choosing herself, finally, completely, without apology or explanation or the need to justify her decisions to anyone. The maple trees are beginning to turn gold again, their leaves catching the October light like coins scattered against the sky. I'm ready for whatever season comes next. I'm ready because I know now that I don't need anyone else's permission to bloom, don't need anyone else's approval to take up space in the world. I'm ready because I've learned that love isn't something you can buy or earn through sacrifice. Real love is freely given and freely received, without conditions or expectations or the weight of unpaid debts. If you're reading this and recognize your own story and mine, if you see your own reflection in these words, know this: you are enough. You have always been enough. Your love was real, even if it wasn't returned. Your generosity was beautiful, even if it wasn't appreciated. Your sacrifices mattered, even if they weren't acknowledged. But you are not required to shrink yourself to fit into other people's lives. You are not required to pay for affection or purchase acceptance. You are not required to be grateful for crumbs when you deserve the whole feast. You are not required to accept silence when you deserve explanation, not required to shoulder blame when the fault lies elsewhere. Choose yourself. Choose your dreams. Choose the life that makes you smile when you wake up in the morning, the life that fills you with anticipation rather than dread. Choose peace over permission. Choose joy over justification. Choose the freedom to love without losing yourself in the process. Choose you, because you are worthy of your own love, worthy of your own dreams, worthy of a life lived on your own terms. With love and hope for all the grandmothers who deserve better, Estelle Merrick. If this story touched your heart, don't leave without subscribing. This channel is a home for real pain, real healing, and maybe even someone just like you.